on this hot day. Oh yeah, we're live. We're live. Are we live? No. Yeah, we're live. Okay. I want to thank everyone for being here today. We are here to talk about extreme heat, and I don't think I need to convince anyone that it's hot. It's actually my 1-year anniversary in Athens, and I arrived last summer in the peak of one of the biggest heat waves in Greece history. I thought, what am I going to do? I will melt. Thank you. Thank you. So we're gathered here today to talk about urban resilience and extreme heat and what local communities are doing to respond to extreme heat. And I'm very pleased, before we start the panel discussion, to invite the president of the Hellenic Red Cross, Dr. Afgarinos, to make some opening remarks. And he's had a busy day. I saw him running in 9 different directions. So I'm lucky to have made him, made his list of events today. So Dr. Afgarinos, thank you for being here.
Yeah, just a few words. And on behalf of the Hellenic Red Cross, I bid a cordial welcome to both Australian and Greek participants. And actually, I very much appreciate your kindness and politeness to be with us, to teach us, and to inform us about what are you doing in Australia regarding the disasters, etc., etc. Actually, I'm very happy to see that so many participants are here in order to exchange views and information and to discuss issues and problems which are of great interest to our field of specialization. I hope that all events and functions of this meeting be crowned with success because of you. Thank you very much, dear judge.
Thank you. And now we bid you farewell. On to the next thing. The world needs you and the world needs the Hellenic Red Cross. So there's no time to rest. Thank you for being here. Okay. So I'd now like to invite our panelists to the stage. So please come. Thanks again, Dr. Afgarinos. I'm going to try not to fall off the stage. That's one of my objectives. We're cozy. We're cozy. And we have a big panel, which is fabulous because the challenge of extreme heat is not one that is tackled by one actor, one person, one organization alone. And what I'm learning, thanks to many of the friends on this panel who've helped me to learn about the dangers and the reality of extreme heat, what I'm learning is that the solutions take collaboration, they take partnership, they take science, and they take action at a very local level. So we have all of those perspectives with us today. One of the things that I think is really important to say about extreme heat is that it is the most deadly weather-related disaster. So in the face of climate change, in the face of more extreme weather events, extreme heat is a very real threat and one that is killing people. It's killing people alone in their homes all too often and out of the headlines and out of sight. So it is a real threat. It's a real threat to people. It's a real threat, especially to vulnerable people in cities. But what makes me feel hopeful in the face of this heat and the threat of extreme heat in the future, what makes me feel hopeful is that these are also preventable deaths. And we can do things together to better be prepared for extreme heat and to be better ready to respond to that extreme heat. So we're really lucky to have a diverse panel today to talk to us and to share their expertise. We're going to try to keep it as informal as possible, questions and answers. I let Kostas have slides because he's the science guy, but no one else was allowed slides. And we're going to try to keep it engaging. We're a small group in the room, so I'd be thrilled if you join in, ask questions, don't be shy, don't feel like you have to be quiet in the back row. Please join in the discussion. So let me first introduce our panel. Let me get everybody in the right order here. So beside me, don't read it. Don't do it. Don't read it all. Okay. Well, tell them your title. I'm not going to just call you science guy. So this is Dr. Kostas Lagovardados. Please help me.
Okay, Lagovardo.
Lagovardos, thank you. My Greek has gotten no better in 1 year. And he is the research director at the National Observatory of Athens in the Institute for Environmental Research. So we're thrilled to have him here to talk about the data, to talk about the science, and to talk about the weather. Alana Pedler is here from the Australian Red Cross. And where is your bio, Alana? Alana is the State Operations Coordinator with Emergency Services in the Australian Red Cross. And so we're thrilled to have Alana here. Next to Alana is Eilish McGuire. Welcome. Eilish is the project officer with Telecross Ready, a program that's running with the Australian Red Cross to respond to extreme heat. Thank you, Eilish, for being here. Dimitris, welcome. Dimitris Haliotis, did I do okay? Dimitris is a Samaritan volunteer with the Hellenic Red Cross. He's on the front lines. He's the one in the red pants and the red jacket, the first to give up his free time to train and be prepared, and the first to be on the front lines when there's a wildfire or a heat wave or a new arrival of migrants. So we're very lucky to have you with us to share your experiences and the very personal and real components of what it means to respond to extreme weather in Greece. Next up in our panel here is Lenio. Lenio, I want to get your last name right because I also am going to mispronounce it as in the way in which I am. Mirivili. Lenio is the Chief Heat Officer with the City of Athens. She is also a dear friend and co-conspirator. And really I have to give Lenio all the credit for having lit a fire under me, pardon the, link to heat, on heat. She came to see me and she said, we got to do something about heat. And she really lit a fire, and we have been brainstorming together all the ways in which we can work together in partnership to find solutions and to bring all of the different stakeholders together. And last but not least is Pete. Pete Schwartzstein is here with us. He's an environmental journalist and mostly writing for National Geographic and also a fellow with the Wilson Center. So thank you for being here, Pete. And he's going to get us out of our tunnel vision of being here in Athens and to think about heat in other parts of the world and how it's impacting communities, particularly in places that are poorer and hotter than Athens. Thank you, Pete. So I'm going to start with you, Lenio. I haven't given these guys any warning about the order that they're going in, so that's really cruel. I'm going to start with you, Lenio, because I'd like you to talk to us about heat and to tell us, what does it mean to be the Chief Heat Officer of Athens? Or there's one there, and I'll turn this one off. There we go.
Thanks, Jesse. And yeah, thanks for being a great co-conspirator, as you said. So heat is the silent killer, and it kills more people than any other extreme weather event. And cities are not prepared for it. all around the world, cities are heating up because they are built in a really bad way. If we think of climate change and of rising heat, we've been talking about global warming for decades, but we haven't been thinking about heat and cities in particular. Cities have more than 50% of the world's population, and they're becoming death traps because they've been built with concrete and asphalt and cement and glass and steel, and all these things absorb heat. And also there is more creation of heat by people who live in cities because of cars and because of air conditioning and all that, which puts more heat out in the atmosphere. So cities are becoming death traps, basically, for our people and for the ecosystems that are in it, because we also have to think that, trees have a harder time to survive these days in cities. We have different types of species that are kind of coming from the south that are not indigenous, that are affecting other types of species. So the whole thing is going out of whack. And we know that even if we stop producing GHG emissions, and if we stop kind of pouring these things that keep heating our planet tomorrow, we're going to still be hot for a very long time, for about, I don't know, until we figure out a way to start taking carbon and other emissions out of the atmosphere, which we don't really know how to do yet, or we do know, but we haven't really been doing. So we can stop the heat we can stop the heat from rising if we stop emitting. Right now, if we stop emitting, it's not going to go up. It's going to stay where it is, but where it is, it's very hot already. We see fires all over the world, and these are going to continue, and cities are more and more dealing with extreme heat and with temperatures that the infrastructure and the people are not really capable of dealing with. So I was actually also appointed Chief Heat Officer a year ago, the 26th of July 2021, and I we've been dealing with heat and heat resilience, because when we started doing the strategy for Athens resilience for 2030, it became very obvious that the main climate issue that we're having in Athens is heat, rising heat, and flash floods, like quick, sudden flooding, cloud bursts, as they're called, but mostly heat. So this is something that's been on our minds for a while, but since I've become the Chief Heat Officer, I've been thinking of 3 specific kind of ways of dealing with it. And one is awareness raising. And this is a very important issue, because especially in heat climates like our climate, people don't take heat exposure seriously. They think, oh, just another hot year and hot summer. So they don't really understand that it's getting deadlier. And we did something with Kostas Laguvardos and the Ars Rock Resilience Center. We piloted a really cool methodology, which I'm going to let Kostas talk about, but I think it's a real game changer. So I'm really glad that Kostas we've been working together for the last year. And then the second pillar is the preparedness, which is most of the stuff that we're doing together with Jesse and the Hellenic Red Cross, which has to do with all of the different actions that we can take short term to protect the most vulnerable, like prevention measures, like making sure that the people are better prepared, that if there's something going wrong, if they start feeling bad, they know how to deal with it, they know who to call, and there's like people that are right there to support them. So that's the second part of different actions. And then the third part of different actions, which is the harder one, is to redesign cities so that they're actually cooler. And this, to a large extent, we have technologies and materials to deal with that. But the main thing is bringing nature into the cities radically, like really putting a lot of nature into this city, which is very difficult because we don't have a lot of space, but there are ways that we can do it. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't take too long.
Perfect. Okay. Amazing. So wonderful. And thank you. You're setting the scene for us. You're helping us to reflect on, why are we here and why does this matter? And thank you, Lenio. That's great. We'll come back to you, but I want to go to Kostas now, and we do need the slides. So my dear Yorgos, I need to go to slides. You're going to stand. That's perfect. You're allowed. You have special privileges on this panel.
Thank you for the invitation. I have 3 or 4 slides to show you how we work with. Okay, this one. I will tell you some words about the Athens Heat Alert System. This is a system that we built together with the City of Athens, the collaboration with Lenio and colleagues from US and the ASH Research Center. And we decided to test for the first time in Athens and for this summer a categorization of heat waves. We decided to have 4 categories from 0 to 3. This categorization takes into account the main meteorological conditions that we expect for the next days and the duration of the event. And we made an application for this summer, which is a pilot application. As you can see on the left hand, it's in Greek, but you can understand we have 4 categories from 0 to 3. Category 0, for example, today is a category 0 day because we are in the middle of a mild heat wave, but it's nothing to do with the last one. I will tell you something about last year heat wave. But 0, there is a situation where the most vulnerable people can suffer from heat, and then we go to 3, which is the extreme situation. It means that it's a danger for the vast majority of the population. Okay, we can go to the next one. How we show this information? We, at the National Observatory of Athens, we operate a web page which we call www.meteo.gr. It's a weather page that provides usual weather forecasts. For example, if you click again, is in Greek, but you can see if we click in Athens Center, you can see forecast for the next days. This is normal things like you expect on a weather page, temperature, humidity, and phenomena. And you can see, for example, that we expect, this is yesterday's forecast for today, Wednesday, and we expected today 39 degrees. Indeed, we have 38.6 measured in the center of Athens 2 hours ago. And when we have a warning about the new system, we have this triangle that shows us over there. This is an indication for people. Okay, yes, okay. So you can click there and you have information on if the next days will be category 0, 1, 2, or 3. And we have a lot of discussion with Lenio to decide which is the best format to show this information. And we write with a triangle and with 4 categories, it will be the best way. We will see. It's a pilot year. We will see how we continue next year to have these 4 categories. Can I have the next transparency? Another thing that is important, and I had a discussion, with Jesse, for example, is if you want to support people on the ground, that help people that suffering from heat, one information is the forecast. We expect, for example, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, we have extreme heat or mild heat, but we have what we call a heat wave. Heat wave, we consider it as a maximum temperature over 37, but as I told you, we take into account also the duration, etc., to have the categorization. One other thing that also can support the responders, the first responders, is to show the real situation. And the real situation in major cities like Athens is to have data from weather stations that they do not provide forecast, but provide the real situation. Because you can follow, for example, this is Athens area, and this is the network of stations we have. They're all online. And this is the web page where you find this information in real time. And you can see, for example, how in an area like Athens, you are over there, okay? And this is Athens, this is the airport. And how the weather, the temperature evolves every 10 minutes. You have an update. And you can see, for example, some areas that are hotter and some areas that, for example, in the northern part of Athens, that are the temperature is much better. It's cooler. It's around 28, 29. This is from yesterday, real-time observation. This is good because you can provide, useful, we think, because you think to provide the responders and to pinpoint which areas in a big city are in reality suffer more from the heat. And because first responders also can use that for other natural disasters related to weather, for example, for rainfall. If you have another episode in autumn and winter of extreme rainfall, you can see, for example, which area has received the heaviest rainfall amount so far, or when it's very cold, which is another problem. Okay, which are the areas in real time where the lowest temperature occur. And this information, together with the forecast, is something we think is useful for the general public, but also for stakeholders and the first responders. And the last one, this is an idea we started again. Can I have the next one? Okay. This is an idea of how to provide, because so far we made this alert system only for Athens. And we made it only for Athens because we made the work beforehand to compare temperature and mortality data for the last 20 years. I forgot to tell you that the four categories that we show you on the triangle correspond to mortality rate exceedance. For obvious reasons, we do not announce this mortality exceedance. For example, category 1 means that you can have 20% more deaths than normal. But as I told you, we do not announce on public these numbers. One other thing that we made, and we'll continue next year to work on that, is to go to the national level. And in that case, we provide, when we have a heat wave, an information of with color which is the area we expect the highest temperature. For example, this was for 2 days ago. And you can see with the dark red, brown colors where it's the highest temperature, but also how much population will, which is the portion of the population that will be affected by this high temperature. For example, we have information that on this specific day, 2 days ago, over 37, almost 8 million Greek people, according to the census, will suffer from temperature that will be over 37 degrees. Of course, this is only for population, does not take account summer vacations and tourist inflows. Of course, it's for this information, and it was very well received by the media and people, because we made the first announcement 3 days ago, because we give you, I think, the severity of the phenomenon, how many people will be affected by high temperature. And the last slide, and I finish because I made it long, it's something about the past. It's in Greek one, but it's the sum of warm hours per summer since 1979. Warm hours we consider extreme temperatures found over Athens. Okay. And we have been on the vertical is the number of hours. You can see, for example, 1979 up to last year. Okay, we have many hours that we have over exceedance of a certain threshold that we consider as warm hours. We have a big major heat wave in Athens with many dead people in 1987, you can see. But what you can see is the last bar is it's last year. We have 22, almost 10 consecutive days out, 240 hours during summer, when temperature in Athens was over a very high threshold. And this gives an indication, as Jesse said, that we have an extreme heat wave last year. And to finalize, we discussed with our colleagues in Greece and abroad what happened last year. Last year was an image of the future, how the summers will be in the future. Maybe summers like the 2021 will be the normal summer in the next decades if we do not stop climate change. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Costa. Super, super helpful. So important, and I really feel validated by the bar chart, because no, it was hot last year. I wasn't crazy, but it is deeply concerning, and I think that's why we are all compelled to act as well, is that this wasn't an anomaly. We know that last year is something that will repeat in the future. So Dimitris, can you tell us about, and tell our participants here about, what does this mean for people in communities? What do you see as a volunteer of the Hellenic Red Cross when it comes to heat?
So good afternoon, everybody, first of all. And let's go straight to the point. The main issues we face is at the vulnerable people who don't have access to air conditioning and who have some diseases or some health problems. In these cases, we have faced people actually dying on the road because of the heat. And one more thing that makes me chill a little bit is that unfortunately we are facing the situation of small kids dying in the backseat of a car because parents go for a small time to pick something, but if the heat is too high and the humidity is also high, there is really little time for these kids to survive. And this is another problem that we have to have in mind when we leave the kids in the car. So my suggestion, don't leave the kids in the car, okay? And moreover, we have to, and we need to find the people who are homeless, find the people with health problems and live alone and assist them, find a better place for them so they can survive. Because these numbers takes us under a strong consideration if we can survive or not. That's what we are facing.
Absolutely. And what does the Hellenic Red Cross do right now on a hot day? And you can also, if you want to speak about how you work in response to heat as well as wildfires, which is another part of the dilemma that we face in the context of extreme heat.
What we do in extreme heats is we have composed teams and do their street works, trying to do exactly what I mentioned, trying to find homeless people and assist them, take them to a better place, take them where they can have some cooler situation that they can survive. This is the main task, okay? And moreover, our services trying to find and communicate with people in need at their home, check the conditions at their home, and if the conditions are not the proper, try to reestablish them to somewhere else.
Absolutely. And who are you seeing that is amongst the most vulnerable in the community? What are those people? What's their profile?
Most of the times, old persons are in the need for help.
And with an aging population in Greece, this is a real challenge for sure.
This is also a challenge, but another challenge is drug users. Because usually they are homeless and they are in need for help.
Absolutely. Thanks for those insights. Thanks, Dimitris. We'll come back to you as well. I want to now think outside of Athens and outside of the local. We've been hyper local in the conversation so far. And maybe we could go to you, Pete, and you could talk to us about what you're seeing and what your reporting and research has surfaced in terms of extreme heat in poorer and hotter places around the world.
Well, that's a massive question, and I'll do what I can in the sort of very limited time that I guess we've all been allotted. I spend most of my time working in parts of the world that are considerably poorer than Greece and also hotter. And as a consequence, this sort of extreme heat, whether it's born out of climate change or whether it's just a sort of consequence of the usual high summer highs that many people experience, are just sort of starting to affect people, well, not starting, have long since begun to affect people in all sorts of extraordinary ways. Without sort of turning this into a laundry list, I just want to sort of quickly talk about the manner in which this affects livelihoods, the manner in which this affects health and education, and then perhaps a little bit later in the session, I can talk a bit about the security ramifications, which is the main thing that I personally work on. But so agriculture is, when it comes to climate change or environmental degradation, almost uniquely vulnerable to extreme heat and other manifestations of climate change. And this is a particular problem because in most poor countries, agriculture fulfills a much greater share of employment and a much greater share of GDP than elsewhere. And what we're seeing with extreme heat, to put aside other problems for one moment, are massively diminished crop yields in southern Egypt of up to 20 to 25%. And we're a farmer living off already very marginal profits. That loss can be more than enough to sort of pitch you deep into the red. Summers are getting hotter, but even more than that in a Middle Eastern and North African context, they're getting longer. And so in Jordan, the tomato season, for example, a kind of leading cash crop in the Jordan Valley, used to start in about September, and that was farmers' sort of key kind of annual earner. But now, because the extreme heat is continuing right through to October, in many instances, their tomato growing season has shrunk by about half. And I mean, much like some Greek islands will be earning almost all of their income within that sort of touristy summer season, many of these farmers kind of depend on that sort of key period for their earnings. And then you've got pastoralism, and pastoralists are arguably even more exposed to climate stresses than their settled farmer peers. And that's because at times of extreme heat, many of their animals are particularly likely to fall sick. They suffer from organ failure. I'll talk in a minute about the kind of ways in which this is true of humans as well. But it's becoming increasingly common at times of extreme heat for pastoralists to lose well over half, and in some instances, almost all of their sheep, their goats, their cows. And also heat waves are often accompanied by droughts. And so for both farmers and pastoralists, at their times of kind of peak need, they have less water than ever before. So that's the livelihoods for a moment. Then you've got lost economic productivity. There's been this trope, sort of something that really took hold back in the colonial era, that people in hot countries were lazy. But the basic reality is that doing little in the middle of the day is a natural defense mechanism. And well, kind of a kind of the most natural of instincts. Lenio touched on how a lot of countries are particularly poor at grasping the dangers of high heat exposure. But in places where they've had to contend with this sort of problem for a while, they've adapted accordingly. There was a recent study suggesting that if heat kind of continues to strike the US to the extent that it currently is, then that'll be another $200 billion a year in lost productivity alone. And then health, and this is something that perhaps we'll talk about in greater length down the line. But there's a concept that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and perhaps many of you in the crowd, called the wet bulb effect. And that generally falls at about 35 Celsius, coupled with high levels of humidity. And that's the point at which even young, physically fit people are no longer able to effectively regulate their body temperatures. We tend to think of extreme heat as something that affects the elderly, the pregnant women and children, while kind of mostly leaving kind of perhaps slightly physically tougher demographics of society alone. But with kind of ever greater degrees of heat, you have more young farmers in countries like Iraq and Iran, more construction workers and traffic policemen in places like Tehran succumbing to heat exhaustion and heat stress. And then one final thing is education. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, some of which has been supported by sort of limited statistical evidence, because this is something that's hard to measure, showing that kind of ever greater degrees of heat, particularly in the sort of unair-conditioned, uncooled school blocks in which many children in poorer parts of the world learn, is seriously damaging their learning prospects. So in Sudan, for example, there's been this sort of drive to end school a little bit earlier in the day than they previously did, because the kids were sort of slumping forward in a kind of exhausted mess, as were their teachers after a while. So I'll leave that for the moment, but just trying to give a little taste of how this is playing out in places that are considerably worse afflicted than Greece.
Absolutely. And it's somehow an issue that is affecting all of humanity in different ways, but we somehow can all relate to the dilemma and the pressure that it's putting on communities. But it's important to remember that it's putting in even more acute stress on some of the most vulnerable communities and folks that don't have a lot of coping mechanisms or a lot of resilience in the first place. What are you seeing, and where do you see the intersection between climate change, extreme heat, and insecurity?
Okay, well, yeah, this is my main area. So you have perhaps some of the more direct manifestations. Now, we tend to think of climate instability, climate-related violence as a phenomenon that's unique to poorer parts of the world, and it's certainly true that that's where it's playing out most potently. However, there's a very strong correlation something that most people put down to causation between extreme heat and elevated rates of gender-based violence. So for example, in Paris in recent years, kind of shelters for abused women have almost always been at peak occupancy at times of extreme heat. To sort of, kind of whittle down this kind of enormous topic in which I could very happily hold forth for an outrageous amount of time. You also have an inordinate number of indirect drivers. I spent periods of bits and pieces of a 3 to 4 year time span looking at the ways in which different manifestations of climate change, including extreme heat, contributed to ISIS's emergence in central Iraq and northeastern Syria. And what you had there was kind of drought combining with kind of crop killing extreme heat to more or less expunge crops of communities which were already poor to begin with, who already had strong degrees of kind of anti-state sentiment from kind of decades worth of grievances, real or perceived. And so 2013, 2014, the period in which sort of ISIS really burst onto our kind of collective horizon, also happened to be a year of absolutely debilitating heat in the agricultural heartland of these two countries. Now, ISIS, along with every other extremist group, has many mothers and fathers. However, the evidence showing that heat contributed to the degree of desperation ISIS recruiters preyed on is pretty clear. And I mean, briefly to bring it to Greece, I don't want to get kind of too enmeshed in the climate migration timeline. And again, we know that migration, as with insecurity, has an absolute kind of legion of drivers. However, if you look at or talk to many of those who have been coming through Turkey or over the sea over the past decade, an inordinate number of them come from places where extreme heat and drought have rendered an array of livelihoods simply impossible, and that's a hell of a push factor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also resist the temptation to sort of emphasize the push of insecurity, climate change, and loss of livelihoods to the threat that represents in terms of migration to Europe, because I think it's a sort of problematic narrative. But on the same token, it sort of emphasizes and reinforces the interconnection between these issues in the world and the way in which the consequences of climate change, of extreme heat, of loss of livelihoods play out both locally, but also globally and across borders. So it's important that we talk about it. And I think there's lots in the room that work on migration and have lots of insights on that perspective as well. Let's go to Australia now. In Australia, it's far away. Took you a long time to get here. Thank you for coming. Can you tell us about how heat waves are impacting communities in Southern Australia and what the Australian Red Cross is doing to respond to that?
Thank you very much for having us. Yes, it did take a long time to get here. Thank you. And we did leave Adelaide. It was 11 degrees and raining. I think it was 38 when we arrived here. So it has taken us a few days just to adjust. There is a lot of similarities between Adelaide and South Australia, where Ailish and I live, in Athens. So it is familiar heat. It's just a little bit outside of our usual time of the year to be experiencing it. In Australia, we've seen the climate change driving the increase in heat waves. So we're having longer heat waves. They're more intense, then they're more often across the state. In South Australia, we experience significant heat waves every summer, but we're seeing them last longer, and we're seeing the impact on our most vulnerable communities be impacted earlier and longer for them as well. So that's, again, building on what has already been said. Our homeless populations, people living on the street, they feel that change in temperature and that heat first because they're already outside. They feel it the most intense, and they feel it for longer because they're outside the entire time. So they don't get that opportunity to cool down at night, even more than we do, even if we have air conditioning on that. We see our aging population really struggling during those heat waves. People with other health conditions where it's exacerbated by that intense heat, that really dry, intense heat that we receive in South Australia. So we're seeing that we're having more to put more effort into for emergency service. We're putting a lot more effort into our community preparedness and our messaging that goes out to those vulnerable communities. So a couple of things that we've done over the last few years. Ailish will talk about one in a minute. But some of the projects we've put some time and effort in is to working with our homeless populations in Adelaide and South Australia, working with them as a co-design project, so we could work with them and what they actually need, so find out from them what information they already receive. A study found that 45% of people sleeping in the street in South Australia during a significant heat wave didn't receive any warning about that upcoming event. That means if they don't know that an extreme weather event is coming, they don't have any opportunity to make any decisions to keep themselves safe. They don't know they need to go find a shelter. They don't know where else they could go for support. So a lot of that particular project was working with that particular community and the service providers that support them, and how do we best educate the service providers, because they're the ones that speak to the guys on the street every single day. So it's about educating the service providers and other agencies in South Australia who already have that daily contact with those vulnerable communities, and a lot of public messaging, a lot of education about what it looks like to experience some heat-related illness. Who else can help them? What else can they do in the lead up, during, and after a significant heat event that can better keep themselves safe? And most importantly, who else around them needs some extra support? So one of our core business projects for the last 12 years now is called Telecross Ready. It's, one of the reasons we're in Athens at the moment is to work with the Hellenic Red Cross and IFRC on our Telecross support program. So it's a telephone glass-based service that we call our most vulnerable people during a heat wave, just to check in with them and part of those wellbeing calls. And we can escalate to people, friends, family, and call an ambulance if people need that extra support. So it's one of the reasons we're here. This week is to share some of those stories of public messaging, education, community development, and some of our projects that have worked in the last 12 years in South Australia, and how they can be hopefully transferable to Athens and wider Greece over the next couple of summers.
Awesome, thanks. And maybe that's a good segue to you, Ailish. How are you using telephone calls to save lives?
Beautiful question. So as you mentioned, the vast majority of people who are dying because of heat-related illness are people who are vulnerable in their own homes and alone. And so in the summer of 2009, the Australian Red Cross was approached by our local government department and asked if there was something we could do. And this program emerged with a phone service where we call pre-registered clients and talk them through a wellbeing survey so we can identify heat-related illness and anything that could become fatal before it happens. So the purpose of it was to really ease the strain on our healthcare system, but save those prevent those deaths that didn't have to happen. Since 2009, we've made over 38,000 phone calls. And out of those, only, I think it's 168 people have had to go to hospital. So the work that we do with these clients before and during a heat wave to help them prevent these heat-related illnesses happening and exacerbating the vulnerabilities that they already experience has made a tangible difference in the amount of lives that have been lost.
Thank you. And I think it's you have to see the picture from the Telecross Ready website, because there's the sweetest lady on her landline in the photo, and I'm sure she's a real riot to talk to, including in a heat wave. Ailish was saying that sometimes the answer they get to "have you been drinking water" is "no, but I've been drinking champagne," which they coach them into, the value of drinking water. But you can imagine that there are a lot of good laughs that happen as volunteers reach out to folks, and amazing psychosocial support that comes with making those calls and giving people a lifeline to the outside world if they live alone. Alana, I'm going to ask you one last question. Then we're going to take a brief 5-minute break for some water and air, because it's hot and we got to keep hydrated. And then we'll come back for just a quick round of questions and a bit of a discussion with the idea of maybe wrapping up around 6:30. Does that work for everybody? Yeah. So last question for the panel before we take a brief break. If you were building this program from scratch, what would your advice be? And what's your advice to a city like Athens and to the Hellenic Red Cross in building programming in response to extreme heat?
Small question then.
Yeah.
Right. Just finish with a really small question. Excellent. I think we've been able to take a lot of learnings from running this program for 12 years now. It was created on the spot during a heat wave. So obviously we've made a lot of mistakes along the way. We've made it improve best practice. I think some things that we've realized over the recent couple of years is right from the start, building really strong relationships with other service providers, government departments, anyone that's involved with emergency response and heat and the weather, to have those relationships right at the start so that you can build warning mechanisms and your messaging is all matches together. There's nothing worse than giving conflicting advice to the community, especially vulnerable people who may not have other people around them to help them understand what those messages look like. So recently, we're adapting our service to match the state emergency services who give out public messaging so that we're using the same language, the same colours, very similar to what was already put on the board earlier. It was always handy. And working with our Bureau of Meteorology, so our weather, our science guys, so that we're using the same language, we're giving the same messaging in the same area. So being able to build a system that can change along the way and evolve just as much as the science evolves around with it makes a huge difference of being consistent, because trying to keep messaging concise but very accurate when in the chaos of a heat wave. And in Australia, when there's a heat wave, there's usually fires, but they tend to go hand in hand in Australia. So trying to get people's attention about a heat wave when most people are looking at the news and seeing the fires, which is probably quite similar here. When you're wildfires at the moment, people are more aware of where the fires are, but probably not so aware of what the temperature's really like and how it's being felt, especially by our most vulnerable community. So there's a lot of similarities between Adelaide and Athens, and I really think there's a lot of messaging and mechanisms that we've been using that we can help leave with you when we leave next week, and help you guys develop a very similar service.
Awesome. And we sat together with Lenio as they were developing the messaging for the city of Athens with the pilot that outlines the new categorization to try to align messaging so that we would sort of try to use the same messaging in our social media posts about extreme heat and supporting the city. And as you say, getting that alignment so communities receive those consistent messaging and messages is so important.
Yeah, one thing we've just found in the last couple of years is to match our heat wave messaging, the colours, the coding, to our fire danger rating, because everyone in Australia is very familiar with our fire danger rating. It's something that's, if you live outside of the city CBD, you know where the fire danger is for your area, you know what the colours, you know what the words mean. So now by making our heat wave response have the exact same messaging, the same symbols, the same colour, to try and get people to really recognise that heat is just as dangerous as a fire, and use the same mechanisms. And I think that we're hoping that means people will take more notice of it, starting from this summer in Australia.
Interesting, really interesting, and some interesting reflection as Athens pilots its 0 to 3 scale and its colors alongside wildfires that are raging and a focus of attention, rightfully so, but often the ones that get the media attention over the heat waves.
That's why we call it a silent killer.
Exactly. So with that, we'll take a brief 5-minute health break, and then we'll have a few questions before wrapping up. But I want to just give a round of applause to our panelists and a big thanks for sharing your insight. So intermission, back in 5.